today we're with Rusty Lee, the regional field specialist from East Central Missouri. And Rusty, there's a lot of interest in grazing milo, but there's some do's and some don'ts about that, how to be successful with that. So why don't you go over that list for us?
A lot of opportunities to succeed with grazing milo, Tim. We'll start at the beginning. Planting milo. The question comes up, seeding rate. We're looking for 70,000 pure live seed per acre. So 70, 80,000 seed per acre, a good place to be. 65-degree soil temperature is a good soil temperature for germination. We do know that planting milo as early as you can is beneficial to yield. For example, April 20th through May 15th is a sweet spot for getting milo planted and getting maximum grain yield. We know that it's starting to slip on yield if it's post May 20. And we know that if you delay planting to June 1st, you're at about 80% of normal production ability. So if we delay planting until June, you've given up 20% of your grain yield. So 65-degree temperature is ideal, but we want to get planted as early as possible.
What about fertilizer?
Fertility, milo, very similar to corn in fertility requirements. We know that 1 bushel of milo grain contains 0.4 of a pound of phosphorus and 1/4 pound of potassium. You take that out to 120 bushel yield, we've got 50 pounds of phosphorus tied up in that grain, and we've got 30 pounds of potassium tied up. But that's grain only. We're also growing forage, right? We have a plant. So the livestock are consuming all this. These nutrients remain on our farm, but they may be transported off of the crop field into some of the other areas, loafing areas around the water tank, back to pasture ground. So I encourage producers to let's fertilize for the grain crop. Nitrogen rates somewhere above 120 units of nitrogen is a good starting point, and then that 50 to 60 pounds of phosphorus and 60 to 80 pounds of potassium.
Because you are growing a grain crop, and that's important.
The underlying principle that makes grazing milo work is the grain. The grain is the carrying capacity. The grain is the energy. It is the cow days per acre. There's a direct relationship. You reduce your bushels per acre, you've reduced your carrying capacity. Your cow days per acre goes down. For example, I use 120 bushel milo as a generic example. With that, we're above 400 cow days per acre. As if we have after wheat milo, and you can certainly grow some grain after wheat like that, but your yield's going to be reduced. And when that yield is down to 40, 45 bushels per acre, you've more than cut your carrying capacity in half.
And herbicide, we want a good herbicide program, keep it clean. Weed
control is a paramount concern, and typical atrazine, metolachlor products post-planting, pre-emerge work very well.
Could we try to overseed something in our milo, or is that just something that we probably shouldn't do right now?
Well, many of us have tried to improve the grazing by having companion planting with the milo. Milo does such a great job of intercepting sunlight that we just have a difficult time establishing other plantings once milo gets going. If we get the companion in front of the milo, then it's a weed and it detracts from our grain yield. If we get the milo started first and then add the companion, it shades out the companion, and we don't have success that way either.
So back on the grain, so we should not harvest our milo and then just graze the plants. We need to have that grain out there, don't we?
Grazing the stubble, the fodder leaves after grain harvest is a common practice, but the carrying capacity is not there. There is some good forage to pick up, but it's going to be short-lived. The alternative feeding program, winter feeding expense reduction from utilizing milo, comes from grazing the grain. We leave the combine out of the equation. We let the cattle harvest the grain.
Anything else on how to make a good milo crop?
look at your variety trials. See what your state university is putting out there, showing the latest genetics. I like a milo that's doing good in my region, my area, and then it also has a good score for stalk disease tolerance and lodging resistance, right? So we're asking this milo to remain standing much longer through the winter than typically we would with a machine harvested crop. So stalk strength becomes important. I like a compact or semi-compact head. The red milo, the bird resistant, high tannin, so the red milo, obviously advantages there so that we don't have so much loss to wildlife.
But do the cattle and livestock like it as well?
So cattle still consume it, even though it's the higher tannin content. What we find is that milo has a slower rate of digestibility. So when we use milo grain and we feed it to hogs and chickens, etc., processing and grinding of that grain is often utilized to increase digestibility. But we leave it in its natural, slower to digest state, and that gives us protection from overeating. We don't have animal health issues from overeating in milo, partly due to the slower rate of digestion. If we had free choice shell corn, we could founder cattle pretty easily. But with milo, it's a little safer product to be grazing.
So I should start eating milo.
Well, it may be too late for a couple of us, Tim.
Okay, well, I thought that was a great idea. And we can start getting this full benefit as soon as the grain is 20% moisture. We can turn the livestock out there.
Oh, absolutely. So you can graze milo as a green plant in the dough stage. As the grain starts maturing, it continues to be an excellent feed source through the winter with the stored energy in that grain in November and December and January. Absolutely. I say there's only 2 weeks of the year that you cannot graze milo, and that's at first frost in the fall, because we do have the prussic acid concerns with any of these sorghum species. So as we have cellular damage to that plant, we do have that toxic effect of prussic acid. And it takes a week or so for those materials to volatilize and it becomes safe to consume again. But as we are dancing around those first 1 or 2 fall frosts, it makes it a little tricky to graze.
In that a good killing frost or just even a light frost?
Any damage to that plant will has a potential to release prussic acid. The trick is it takes a few days for that to go away, but in the meantime, we have a follow-up frost that does damage to more of the plant. Mm-hmm. So once we can get the entirety of the plant frosted and dead, then we're finding ourselves, we're in a safe position to graze. It's those partial light frosts, those patchy frosts that are the hardest to manage around.
So if you're grazing, you can move your livestock over to your stockpile pasture.
Absolutely. You can graze milo green, and at the first sign of frost, those cattle must come off immediately and go to alternative forages, maybe stockpile fescue, dry lot with hay bales. But for about 2 weeks, you got to stay away from the milo. November 1st, year in and year out in central Missouri ends up being a pretty good day to plan for. You can plan that by November 1st, we've had a couple of weeks since the killing frost. And but this past year it was a lot later of a freeze, and so you just kind of have to roll with it. But 2 weeks after fall frost, and then you can start grazing.
And any worries about nitrate poisoning?
So nitrate poisoning, if we do a good job of feeding that plant what it needs, and it can pick up that material and metabolize it and use it for plant growth, we won't have an issue. If we over-fertilize and we're grazing it green, okay, we do need to consider weather stresses and how that plant, the metabolism of the nitrogen is suspended or reduced, and so we have an uptake, and so there's a content of nitrogen that can be an issue, right? So similar to chopping silage, you don't want to get right in there following a drought. You've got a plant that's trying to pull up all that nitrogen. So we do have to manage around that, especially when we're grazing green. Winter grazing of milo, I haven't seen that be a concern. I just want to encourage people to consider milo grazing. Start small. No one necessarily needs to go from 0 to 100 acres of milo, right? So just think that with 40 head of cattle, if you have 40 head of cattle, you're going to use up about 1/10 of an acre of milo a day. Okay, so every acre of milo you plant gives you 10 days grazing with 40 cows. Okay, so think about creating yourself a 30-day to 45-day window of grazing. So 3 or 4 acres, something less than 5 acres of milo is a really good place to start. If you're a fall calver and you think about bull turn-in around Thanksgiving or 1st of December, starting on your milo for 30 days prior to bull turn-in seems to have some really good positive effects on our conception rate and our calving rate. So we're taking cattle off of that fescue. We're putting them on a really good plane of nutrition minus the toxicity of the fescue, and cattle really do respond to that. By February, you're going to be tired of moving electric fence. The ground is soft, it's wet, there's mud. So can you graze all winter? Yes, but it does seem to be some diminishing returns. You get weary from it, and so that November, December, January, anywhere in there is a really good time to graze milo.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Rusty, and good luck to folks out there. And they can always contact you if you got any questions.
Absolutely. So I can be reached at the Montgomery County Extension Office, 573-564-3733, or you can pick me up through email, leerw@missouri.edu. Be glad to visit with you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Rusty.
You're welcome.